At my retirement party, my son leaned close to his wife and whispered, "Keep him talking. I need 20 minutes alone in his office." 3 weeks later, I found out why. And what I did next, I don't think either of them will ever recover from. My name is Walter Hargrove. I am 67 years old. I spent 42 years building Hargrove Lumber and Supply from a single pickup truck and a handshake loan into the largest independent building materials company in the county. I poured my blood into that business. My wife Dorothy poured her soul into it. We skipped vacations. We missed school plays. We ate sandwiches at our desks on our anniversaries because there was always one more order to fill, one more delivery to schedule, one more payroll to make. And when Dorothy passed from a stroke 18 months ago, I kept going. Because the business was the last thing I had that still felt like her. She had picked the paint colors in the main office. Her handwriting was still on the index cards in the filing cabinet. I wasn't ready to let any of that go. So when my son and his wife started talking about retirement, I listened. My son had worked at the company for 11 years. He was good with clients, good on the phone, charming in a way I never was. His wife was sharp, organized, always watching. I trusted them. They were family. That was my first mistake. The retirement party was held in the company warehouse. My son had organized the whole thing. Banners, catered food, a slideshow of old photos. I stood there in my good suit looking at pictures of Dorothy and me from 30 years ago, and I cried a little, which embarrassed me, and nobody said anything, which was kind. It was a good night. I felt grateful. I felt like I had done something worthwhile with my life, and that I was handing it to people who deserved it. That was when I saw them. I had stepped away to use the restroom. The hallway beside the back office was quiet, away from the music and the voices. My son and his wife were standing near the fire door, close together, their backs to me. His hand was on her arm. He was speaking low, his head tilted down toward her ear. "Just keep him busy with the speeches and the photos," he said. "I need to get into the files. The Keswick folder is in the second drawer. If I have the numbers tonight, we can move on Monday." She nodded once. Sharp. Practiced. Like they had rehearsed it. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. My good dress shoes were silent on the concrete floor. They didn't turn around. I did not go to the restroom. I went back to the party. I smiled. I shook hands. I cut the cake my daughter-in-law had ordered. I gave a speech about hard work and legacy, and how proud I was of the next generation. My son stood beside me with his arm around my shoulder, beaming. And I thought about what he had said. The Keswick folder. Monday. I had no idea what the Keswick folder was. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Dorothy always rode shotgun. I still talk to her sometimes on long drives. That night, I told her something was wrong. I told her I didn't know what yet, but I could feel it, the same way I used to feel a bad storm coming before the sky had even changed color. She would have known what to do. She always knew. I just drove and tried to remember how to breathe. The next morning, I did not go to the office. That was unusual enough that my son called me at 9, his voice bright and careful. "Everything okay, Dad? We thought you'd be in." "Tired," I said. "Big night. I'm going to take a few days." "Of course," he said. "You deserve it. Take all the time you need. We've got everything covered here." "I'll bet you do," I thought. Instead of going to the office, I drove to the other side of town. I parked in the lot of a place I hadn't been inside in 4 years. It was a small brick building on Clement Street with the name Howard Baird, CPA stenciled on the frosted glass door. Howard Baird was 63, bald, meticulous, and had been doing the books for Hargrove Lumber since the beginning. He had been at Dorothy's funeral. He had cried more than most people. He looked up when I walked in, and his expression told me something before I had even opened my mouth. It was not surprise. It was the face of a man who had been waiting for a conversation he didn't want to have. "Walter," he said. "Howard," I said. "Tell me about the Keswick folder." He took his glasses off. He set them on the desk. He looked at the wall for a moment. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He pulled open his bottom drawer and took out a thin manila folder. He placed it between us on the desk like evidence at a trial. Inside were printed emails, a purchase agreement, and a county zoning application. Keswick Development Group was a commercial real estate firm based in the state capital. They had been quietly acquiring parcels along the Route 9 corridor for the past 14 months. Office parks, distribution centers. The county had approved a new interchange on the highway, and suddenly that stretch of land was worth 5 times what it had been worth 2 years ago. Hargrove Lumber sat on 11 acres, right at the midpoint of that corridor. We had owned the land outright since 1987. Dorothy and I had paid off the mortgage the year our son started high school. The property value, according to the documents in Howard's folder, had been assessed by Keswick at $4.2 million. They approached the company 6 months ago, Howard said, his voice careful and quiet. They contacted your son directly. He told them he was the incoming owner. He told them a transition was already in progress. My hands were flat on my desk. I kept them still. He showed them the succession documents. Howard continued. The ones you signed 3 years ago when Dorothy got sick the first time. The ones that gave him operational authority if you were incapacitated or unavailable for an extended period. I remembered signing those. Dorothy had insisted. She said we needed to plan. She sat next to me at the lawyer's desk and squeezed my hand. I signed because she asked me to. It was supposed to be a safety net. He told Keswick that for tax and estate purposes, the transfer of ownership would be handled quietly, Howard said. He told them you had agreed in principle. He told them the deal would close within 60 days of the retirement party. The retirement party, the party my son had organized, the banners and the slideshow and the catered food. He had planned it like a stage set, a performance to mark the moment I officially stepped away, the moment my signature on those succession documents became useful. Howard, I said. Did he sign anything? Not yet, Howard said. He needs the land survey and the title report. Those are in the Keswick folder. He was going to pull them at the party. He paused. I think he was going to present you with a done deal, a check already in progress. Tell you it was a gift. Tell you he'd taken care of everything. Tell me it was a gift. The same way they had told me the retirement party was a gift. I sat in Howard's office for another hour. He walked me through everything he knew, which was more than I expected and less than I needed. My son had not forged anything. Not yet. The succession documents were real. My signature was real. But he had used them to misrepresent himself to a buyer, to imply an authority he did not have, to set up a transaction that would have been nearly impossible to unwind once the money started moving. When I left Howard's office, I sat in my truck for a while. I looked at the building across the street. It was a dry cleaner. A woman came out carrying a plastic-wrapped suit on a hanger. She walked to her car. She drove away. The world just kept going. I thought about my son. I thought about the 11 years he had worked beside me. I thought about teaching him to drive a forklift when he was 19. I thought about the look on his face the day Dorothy died, standing in the hospital hallway with his tie loosened, his eyes red. Had that been real? I didn't know anymore. That was the worst part. I couldn't separate what had been real from what had been performance. I thought about his wife. I thought about how she had organized Dorothy's memorial luncheon, how she had held my hand during the eulogy, how she had cried at the graveside. I had been grateful to her. I had thought, at least my son has someone steady. I thought about $4.2 million in 60 days. Then I thought about what Dorothy would have said. She would have said, Walter, you built this. Don't you dare let it go quietly. I started the truck. There was one person I needed to talk to. His name was Frank DeLuca. He was 69, retired, and he had spent 30 years as a commercial real estate attorney before his knees gave out, and he moved to a house on the lake 20 minutes from town. He and Dorothy had been close. He had handled the original land purchase in 1987. He knew where every document was buried. He answered the door in a flannel shirt with a coffee mug in his hand. He looked at my face and stepped back to let me in without a word. I laid it all out on his kitchen table, the conversation I had overheard, Howard's folder, the Keswick documents, the succession agreement, all of it. Frank listened without interrupting. He refilled my coffee once. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and laced his fingers together and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. The succession agreement gives him operational authority, he said. Not ownership, not the right to sell. Those are two very different things. Can he use it to move forward with Keswick? He can represent that a transition is underway, Frank said, which he apparently already has. But to actually close a land sale, he needs a deed transfer. And a deed transfer on property held in a family trust requires the signature of the trust's primary beneficiary. He looked at me. That's you, Walter. So he can't sell without me. Not legally. But a man who has already told a buyer that a deal is in progress, who has a signed succession agreement in his pocket, and a motivated buyer writing checks, might find creative ways to put documents in front of you, especially if he believes you're distracted, or grieving, or tired. He paused, or retired. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had loaded lumber trucks at 5 a.m. for 20 years. He'll come to me, I said. He'll stage it. He'll make it look routine, something to sign for taxes, or a lease renewal, something that sounds like paperwork. Yes, Frank said. What do I do? Frank smiled for the first time. It was a slow, careful smile. You let him, he said. The next 4 days were the hardest of my life. I went back to being the tired, grateful, retired father. I called my son and told him I was feeling good, feeling rested, maybe ready to stop in and say hello to the staff. He told me to take my time. His voice was warm and easy. I played along. On the 5th day, he called me. Hey, Dad, can you swing by the office this afternoon? Nothing urgent. Just a couple of documents for the year-end tax filing. Boring stuff. But the accountant needs your signature, since you're still listed as primary on the trust. Boring stuff. Year-end taxes. The language of a man trying very hard to make something sound like nothing. Sure, I said. What time? Say 3 o'clock. I'll have coffee ready. He had coffee ready. That detail turned my stomach. Dorothy always had coffee ready. He knew that. I hung up the phone and called Frank. Then I called Howard. Then I sat in Dorothy's chair in the living room, the one by the window she used to read in, and I talked to her for a while. I told her what was happening. I told her I was angry, and I told her I was heartbroken, and I told her I was going to handle it. I told her I was going to protect what we built. I told her I was sorry it had come to this. The office at 3 o'clock was quiet. My son met me at the front door himself. He was in a good shirt, pressed, confident. His wife was at her desk in the back. She looked up when I came in and smiled and waved. And I waved back. I was wearing my old work jacket, the canvas one with the Hargrove lumber patch on the chest. The one I wore for 40 years. I had worn it on purpose. My son walked me into the conference room. There was coffee on the table. There were 3 neat stacks of documents arranged in front of the chair at the far end. My old chair, the one with the arms worn down from years of use. Everything was designed to feel familiar, to feel safe, to feel like mine. Just some end-of-year stuff, my son said, settling into the chair across from me. The accountant flagged a few things. I've marked the signature lines. He slid the first stack toward me. I picked it up. I looked at the top page. It was a routine tax form, just as he had described. I initialed it and slid it back. He slid the second stack. I picked it up. I flipped past the first page, which was a lease amendment. Routine. I initialed it. Then I looked at the third page. It was not a lease amendment. It was a purchase and sale agreement between Hargrove Lumber and Supply LLC and Keswick Development Group, dated that week. The sale price was listed at $4.1 million. My name was already printed on the signature line. Under it, and in small print, was a note. As authorized by the Hargrove Family Trust Succession Agreement, dated March 14th, 3 years prior. He had buried it in the middle of a stack of routine documents. Page 3. Between a lease amendment and a utility easement renewal. He had bet that I would initial the first page and keep moving. I set the stack down. I looked at my son. He was watching me. Something moved across his face. A tiny adjustment. The slight tightening of a man who realizes his timing might be slightly off. Something wrong? He said. I looked at the document. I looked at his face. I thought about Dorothy. No, I said. I picked up the pen. His shoulders dropped about a quarter inch. The breath came back into his body. I signed my name. But I did not sign on the line he had marked. I signed on the blank margin at the bottom of the page. Next to where I signed, I wrote 3 words in capital letters: not authorist, fraud. Then I placed the pen on the table. My son stared at the page. He stared at what I had written. The color left his face so fast it was like watching a light switch off. "Dad," he said. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was underneath it was thin and scared. "Dad, this is just a formality. This is part of the Keswick Development Group," I said. My voice came out steady. Steadier than I expected. $4.1 million. Route 9 corridor. 14 months of back-channel negotiations. You told them the transition was already in progress. I looked at him. "What transition exactly?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "The succession agreement," I said, "gives you the authority to sign vendor contracts and manage day-to-day operations. If I am incapacitated, I am not incapacitated. I am sitting in this chair, in full possession of my faculties, having just read every word of a document you buried on page 3 of a routine filing." I leaned forward. "You want to tell me again this is a formality?" He pushed his chair back. "Not far. Just enough to put distance between us." His eyes went to the door of the conference room, where his wife had appeared. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. Her face had gone pale. She was doing the math. "We were going to tell you," my son said. His voice had changed again. Now it was something I didn't recognize. Flat. Calculating. "The deal makes sense, Dad. The company's value is only going one direction. The Route 9 interchange is 2 years out. If we wait, Keswick moves on. We lose the window. I was trying to protect the family's investment by selling it without my knowledge, by acting fast enough to actually get something out of it." His jaw tightened. "You want to know what the honest truth is? You've been paralyzed since Mom died. You can't make decisions. You can't move forward. The business is sitting still while the market moves around it. Someone had to act. There it was. Not buried under paperwork anymore, just out in the air between us. Someone had to act," I repeated. "Yes." I reached into the inside pocket of my old canvas jacket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper and laid it on the table between us. "Then you should have acted more carefully," I said. He looked at the paper. His wife took a step into the room. "What is that?" he said. "That," I said, "is an affidavit from Howard Baird. It details every communication between you and Keswick Development over the past 14 months. It includes the representation you made to them that you held transfer authority over the trust property. That representation was false. It constitutes fraud." I looked at him steadily. "It also documents $460,000 in company funds that were transferred to a personal account in your name over the past 18 months. Vendor invoices for services that were never rendered. Howard has been watching it for 6 months. He came to me." My son's wife made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. My son did not move. He was still in his chair, still looking at the affidavit, and the calculation on his face had stopped. Whatever he was adding up was not coming out right. "There's a second document behind the affidavit," I said. "That one is from Frank DeLuca. You may remember Frank. He handled our original land purchase. He's been my attorney since before you were born." I folded my hands on the table. "Frank has filed a motion with the county court this morning to place the Hargrove family trust assets under a temporary protective hold pending a fraud investigation. As of 11 a.m. today, no transfer, sale, or encumbrance of any trust property can proceed. The Keswick deal is frozen." My son stood up. His chair scraped back hard against the floor. "You can't." "I already did," I said. "You're going to blow up everything we built," he said, his voice rising. "You're going to take this company, this family, and burn it to the ground because your feelings are hurt. That deal was going to set us up for life. All of us. Including you. $4.1 million, I said. "Divided how, exactly? And after the $460,000 you've already helped yourself to, how much of that was actually going to reach me?" His wife turned away. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to both of us, and her hand pressed flat against the glass. My son looked at her. Then he looked at me, and for just a moment, beneath the anger and the calculation, I saw something else, something small and ashamed that he couldn't quite hide fast enough. He looked, for 1 second, like the boy I had taught to drive a forklift. Then it was gone. "So what now?" he said. "You ruin me? You hand everything to the lawyers and watch it all fall apart?" "No," I said. I stood up. I was not a tall man, had never been a tall man, but I had worked with my hands for 40 years, and I was not soft. "I give you a choice." I pulled out the last document from my jacket pocket. A single page. Frank had drafted it the night before. "Option 1, I said. "I walk out of this office, and I let Frank and Howard do what they've already started. The fraud investigation becomes public record. Keswick finds out you were misrepresenting your authority, and they pull out of the deal entirely. The $460,000 in transfers triggers a full financial audit. The DA's office gets involved. You lose your position at this company. You potentially lose a great deal more than that." My son said nothing. "Option 2, I said. "You sign this document right now. It is a full accounting and repayment agreement. You will return the $460,000 to the company over a 5-year payment schedule, personally guaranteed. You will resign as general manager effective today. You will have no further involvement in the management or sale of any trust assets. In exchange, I will not pursue criminal charges. I will not make the fraud referral. I will tell Keswick that the deal is dead due to a change in ownership plans, which is true." I looked at him. "You walk away. You keep your house. You keep your marriage, assuming that's still your call to make. You start over somewhere else." My daughter-in-law turned from the window. Her face was very still. "And the company?" my son said. "The company is mine," I said. "It was always mine. It will remain mine until I decide otherwise." The silence in that room lasted a long time. Outside the window, a truck was backing into the loading dock. The beeping was rhythmic and steady. I had heard that sound 10,000 times. My son picked up Frank's document. He read it slowly. He turned the single page over, as though there might be something on the back. There wasn't. He put it down. He looked at his wife. She met his eyes for a moment. Then she looked at me. And what I saw in her face was not anger. It was something that looked almost like relief. My son picked up the pen. He signed. I did not stay to watch him process it. I picked up the documents. I nodded to my daughter-in-law, who did not nod back. I walked out through the main office, past Dorothy's old desk that now had someone else's things on it, past the staff who looked up from their monitors and didn't know what to do with their faces, and out through the front door into the parking lot. It was a cold afternoon. The sky was gray, the kind of sky Dorothy used to call a working sky, not pretty but honest. I sat in my truck for a while. The next months were not easy. My son did not call me. His wife sent one text, brief and formal, confirming their new address in another city. I did not respond immediately. I held the phone and sat with it and then put it down. I did not know yet what I wanted to say, or if there was anything to say, or if saying it would matter. Some things break clean and some things break in ways that leave edges. This was the second kind. Frank handled the formal transition. Howard brought in an outside manager to run day-to-day operations, while I figured out the longer picture. The Keswick deal died quietly. The Route 9 corridor kept developing, but around us, not through us. One afternoon in early spring, I was in the main office going through the old filing cabinet. Dorothy's handwriting was still on the index cards. I ran my finger over her neat, small letters. Supply chain contacts, vendor terms, notes she had made for herself 30 years ago that still made perfect sense. I thought about what my son had said, that I had been paralyzed, that I couldn't move forward, that someone had to act. He wasn't entirely wrong about the paralysis. He was catastrophically wrong about the solution. But grief does make you still. It makes the world feel like it's moving too fast while you're standing ankle-deep in something thick and slow. I knew that. I had been living in it. Dorothy would not have wanted that for me. She would have been furious about what my son had done. And then, once the fury passed, she would have sat down with me at the kitchen table and asked what came next. She was always interested in what came next. So I started asking myself the same question. The answer I kept coming back to was the one I had been circling for months without admitting it. The building supply business, the one we had poured our life into, was not the same without her. The company worked. The numbers were fine. But the reason I had come in before sunrise every morning for 42 years was not the numbers. It was her. It was building something together. And together was over. I called Tom Alderson, a commercial broker I had known for 20 years. I told him I was thinking about a real sale. A real one, handled correctly, with proper representation, on my timeline, at my price. Tom told me the Route 9 corridor had 2 other interested buyers besides Keswick. Within 3 weeks, he had competing offers. The final sale came in at $4.7 million, $600,000 more than what my son had arranged to hand me without my knowledge. I did not feel the satisfaction I had expected to feel. I felt tired, mostly. And then, slowly, something else. I used a portion of the proceeds to set up a small fund at the county workforce training center. Dorothy had been a big believer in trade skills. She used to say that the people who knew how to build things would always have work. The fund covered tuition and tools for young people getting into the trades: electricians, welders, carpenters, people learning to do the work that lasts. They put a small plaque on the wall of the training center. It has Dorothy's name on it. The font is plain, nothing fancy, the same kind she used on her index cards. I go by there sometimes. I stand in the parking lot and look at the building. People go in and come out. They're learning something. They're going to build things that last longer than either of them will. I think she would have liked that. My son called me once, about 8 months after the day in the conference room. He called on a Sunday evening. I was sitting in Dorothy's chair by the window. I looked at his name on the screen for a long time before I answered. The conversation was short. He told me he had a new job, something in logistics, a different city. He said he wasn't going to ask me to forgive him. He said he knew what he had done and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He said he was sorry. He said he thought about his mother. I told him I thought about her too. I told him I didn't know yet what forgiveness looked like from where I was standing, but that I hadn't closed the door. That I wasn't the kind of man who closes doors permanently. I had just needed to make sure he understood what was behind this one before either of us walked back through it. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You taught me to build things, Dad." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I used that to tear something down." I looked at Dorothy's chair, at the worn armrest, at the small paperback she had been reading the week she died, still sitting on the side table with the bookmark in it. "So am I said. We said goodbye. I put the phone down. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the light was doing that thing it does in late autumn, going gold and long across the grass. Dorothy loved that light. She used to call it the day, saying it did its best. I think about what my son said sometimes, that I was paralyzed, that I couldn't move forward. He meant it as an accusation, but sitting there in that light, I thought maybe the lesson wasn't about moving fast. Maybe it was about knowing the difference between standing still because you're afraid and standing still because you're thinking clearly. Because you're watching. Because you're waiting for the right moment to act. That's what 42 years of building things teaches you, if you're paying attention. The ground doesn't care how fast you pour the foundation. It cares whether it holds. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Someone you helped build your life with? Someone who looked you in the eye and handed you a pen? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this one meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Saga. There are more stories coming, and I promise you none of them end quietly.